Please welcome Francesca de Quesada Covey.
Hi, it's so wonderful to be back on stage with you all today. I am so delighted for what's going to happen next. But all of you have been sitting for a very, very long time. So I would like everyone to please stand up. I would like you to reach towards the sky. Okay. Now say hi to your neighbor that you don't know. Introduce yourselves. Okay. Yes. Okay. That is amazing. The energy has changed in this room. It is so wonderful. Okay, you can all sit down again. So we're going to do something a little bit different right now. You are going to hear from 3 amazing storytellers from 3 of our communities who saw a problem, and instead of just sitting back or talking to their friends about it or talking to their husband about it, they said, I'm going to solve it. And it is so inspiring for me because that is the work that we do. How do we find people that have the power to create change? And so my ask of all of you is to please listen deeply to these stories, connect with them, see what you can learn, and ask yourself, what can I do? What can I take from these stories to do something similar in my community? Thank you so much.
Please welcome Richard Young.
I grew up in central Kentucky. I'm not sure what comes to mind when you hear that, but typically what I get from people are a joke. To be fair, I did grow up barefoot in my grandfather's creek, and I do have a disproportionate number of friends that play the banjo. But having people constantly mock where you're from does end up internalizing a sense of shame. We also do it to ourselves. Growing up, I was told early on that if I wanted to do something important, if I wanted to be successful, I had to leave Kentucky. I did end up leaving. I did not go very far. I went just across the river to Cincinnati, Ohio, to music school. I was surrounded by musicians from across the world, but I still kept hearing jokes about being from Kentucky. It got so frequent that I ended up changing the where I'm from status on Facebook to just be nowhere instead of from Kentucky. I ended up moving back home after that, and I made a transition from music into community development. And at that point, my job meant spending a lot of time in City Hall. I'm sure a lot of you have spent time sitting in City Hall, and after a while, it can start to feel like a really boring, sad version of Groundhog Day. It's just the same people over and over again. But you know what you start to realize is that those are the people that are shaping public policy priorities. And meanwhile, most of the people that I talked to in my neighborhood didn't feel connected to any of it. They felt like the perspective not only didn't matter, but was being actively ignored. While I was sitting in these meetings, I kept coming back to this same question that I faced growing up. Is this really a place that people can stay and shape? That's the context that CivicLex came out of. I got a $5,000 grant from the Emerging City Champions program. Shout out to Knight Foundation for funding it. And it helped me launch CivicLex. Early CivicLex was just a website to help people understand and get involved in local issues, and also in-person events to help people meet policymakers. And for a long time, we were very, very scrappy. But eventually, we grew. And a couple years in, I remember running into someone in the grocery store. And anyone that lives in a small city or a small town knows exactly what grocery store feedback is like. Bad. And she'd been to one of our budget workshops, and she came up to me and she said, you know, I showed up to that city meeting, I came to your budget workshop, I wanted to get inspired and get involved, and so I showed up to this city meeting, and the council voted on the budget before my time for public comment. Her point was basically, you are lying to us, telling us to engage in these systems that don't want our involvement. And that really stuck with me, not just because it felt true, but because it asked me to ask myself a deeper question about my work. If we're telling people to get involved in these systems that don't want their involvement, are we actually just making things worse? So that moment really changed how I thought about my work. CivicLex came out of that because it wasn't enough to help people navigate these broken systems. The systems themselves had to shift. And that is when our work shifted towards focusing on civic health. We help people understand and get involved in local issues, connect with their neighbors, and we work directly with local government to reshape how they make decisions. 3 years after that grocery store moment, I was sitting in a conference room of a very boring government building. And I was surrounded by over 24 city planners who had spent the past 2 weeks hand-coding over 15,000 responses of public comment. We just run one of our largest ever public processes. We had 509 conversations in 1 week to inform our city's 20-year land use plan. And during those conversations, I heard directly from residents about their vision for our city. Most importantly, government was sitting there alongside us hearing that vision too. I remember sitting in that day, we were hand-coding all of this data, and the city's director of planning walked by, and he looked in, and he said, wow, this is a lot better than getting yelled at in a gymnasium, or in a grocery store in my case. And it was, not just because the process was better, but because the input really reshaped our city's long-term plan. It added new policies, committing the city to carbon neutrality by 2050. It added new policies committing the city to undoing the impacts of segregation and redlining, and much more. Since then, we've helped change how over 30 civic processes in Lexington work, from how public meetings are structured, public comment is now at the beginning, not at the end, to how boards and commissions function. And just next month, we're convening a group of 36 randomly selected residents from across our city to rewrite parts of our city charter, literally rewriting the constitution of our community. It'll be Lexington's first ever civic assembly. From such a tiny start, we've become a widely studied example for what it looks like to reshape American democracy at the local level. Hundreds of communities have reached out to us for ideas on how they can strengthen their own community's civic health. And I'm very excited to say that the Knight Foundation has just made a major investment in our work, which will enable us to build a new civic health learning collaborative with other communities, helping cultivate and share new ideas for how to strengthen civic health. Yeah, that's nice. In our democracy, so many people feel like decisions are made for them. Communities are forced to consume decisions, to accept decisions, instead of producing their own future. And if we want a way of life that is truly resilient, we need to reimagine what it looks like to give people agency over their lives. We have to trust people to help shape the future of their own community. And we have to make sure that everyone feels like their place matters, that they can and should stay if they want to. As for me, all these years later, I still hear the same jokes about being from Kentucky. Just a couple of years ago, I was at a conference talking to a very important person, and they asked me if I ride a horse to work, which I don't, although I did grow up learning how to ride one. Thank you all.
Please welcome Orlando Bailey.
I remember watching my grandmother, a tall, slender black woman from the Delta of Mississippi, read the Detroit Free Press every single day while drinking coffee. I am from the east side of Detroit, born and raised, and my mother would often take us to visit her mom almost every day. And every day, my grandmother would be there reading the newspaper and sipping her coffee that she would sometimes sneak some to me. I was always fascinated by the newspaper, so much so that when my grandmother would finish the newspaper, I would climb into her chair, put on her reading glasses, and read the paper too. Only I couldn't read. I was too young enough, I wasn't old enough to read yet. But it was in these shared moments where my grandmother gave me the gift of curiosity. When I was in the 6th grade, I had learned to read by then, and I had purchased my first subscription to the Detroit Free Press with my own money. And I would read the Free Press. Yeah, I would read the Free Press on the school bus on the way to school. But the first time I understood how the news could impact people negatively, I was studying broadcast journalism at Eastern Michigan University, and I was in a media literacy course. And I would often hear my peers and classmates talk about Detroit from what they were reading. What they were reading was that Detroit was a city on the decline. We had a hip-hop mayor. Black people didn't know how to keep the city up. Black people don't know how to take care of their neighborhoods. And what we didn't know at the time was that we were going to be headed into what would become the largest municipal bankruptcy that the city had ever seen, number one. And people, publications, newspapers moved in, not to connect, not to help, but to pick over the bones and to document its decline. I graduated in 2012. A year before we filed for bankruptcy in the city of Detroit, and I graduated into a godforsaken market. Newsrooms were already 4 years deep into cuts, and so I got a job from a mentor doing community engagement on the east side. I remember one of my first assignments was to canvass neighborhoods on the east side to knock on doors whose homes were at risk for property tax foreclosure. A lot of people knew, and a lot of people did not know. And so I would sit on porches and hear stories from folks. I would sit at kitchen tables and hear stories about how their homes were passed down from one generation to the next, how these people were the first Black family on their block. And what we didn't know at the time is that homes in Detroit were being overassessed to the tune of $600 million. My community organization tried to help and curb that, but we were but a drop in the bucket. And to that crisis, Detroit lost 135,000 owners over the span of 5 years. So when I was given a chance to combine my journalism roots with my passion for community civic action, I was thrilled to join Outlier Media. Yes. A place where we say that we are not neutral. We are on the side of Detroiters. And I know all of us might think that we are on the side of the people that we serve, but has anyone ever accused you of running a social services organization instead of a newsroom? It started with an SMS system. Our founder, Sarah Alvarez, founded Outlier in 2016. She understood people didn't need stories. They needed information. People were in crisis, and they didn't need a narrative arc. They needed bullet points. And so Outlier was texting people whose homes were at risk of tax auction, telling them what to do about it, and giving residents information on how to curb their utility costs. Funders told Sarah that what she was doing was advocacy, and it wasn't journalism. Folks in the ecosystem accused her of running a social services organization because she was unafraid to be willing to create information that actually can be used for people to act. But I was excited to join Outlier Media and excited to join an organization like this. So we partnered with the University of Michigan to develop our yearly information needs assessment, where Detroiters tell us what is of priority to them, and we tailor our journalistic output around those findings. What does that look like? It looks like assessing systems and institutions that cause harms to Detroiters and expose them and hold them accountable, like exposing negligent landlords who have Detroiters living in substandard conditions. It looks like valuing the experiences of reporters with diverse background and allowing them to bring that cultural intelligence to their work. It looks like building out a newsroom culture during the COVID years that actually paid well and cared for its people. And our outcomes are municipal and legislative movement toward the people who are most harmed. High reporter and editorial scores, which could have something to do with us covering 100% of their health care and offering a 401k match. Or it could look like helping residents claim $6 million worth of profits that the county illegally kept to the tune of $400 million off the sale of their foreclosed homes. You heard that right. Yeah, so Kobe Levin, Outlier Reporter, came to me with an idea. He wanted to do an event where we called a list of 2,700 residents who were collectively owed about $20 million in profits from the county, just to let them know. I love the idea, and I pushed to make the information actionable. They know they're owed taxes, then what? So our editor-in-chief, Aaron Perry, allowed our reporter to step away from the grind of producing stories every day and investigations to create a resource-driven program that activated and trained our Detroit documenters and resident volunteers to put on call-a-thons. We worked to build out a suite of resource partners that included legal aid experts, notary services, and community development organizations to help residents throughout the entire process. And as it stands today, $3.8 million have been returned to residents. Thank you. It wasn't always easy having Kobe away from reporting, Aaron would tell you that, but it was worth it, and it was worth it because that's the outlier way. It wasn't always an easy feat serving communities who are contending on the margins, trying to make sure that the people who need our information the most are getting it. It's not always easy having to educate and convince philanthropy that this work is worth supporting. It gets hard, struggling to grow and keep audiences as algorithm changes and generative AI takes over Google search. But in 10 years, I ask you, what do our communities need, if not journalists who are unafraid to create actionable information that they can use, even if that means being criticized and being labeled as advocates? What are we doing if we're not serving the people who shore up our societies? And it's because of this. This work for me is deeply personal. When systems and structures were void of resources, I watched my grandmother provide those resources for people who needed it the most. I watched my grandmother take in information and fan it out because she was reading the paper every day. I was 12 years old when I realized she was not only the mother of our family, but the mother of our community. Every Friday, folks came for a meal, a good time, and some information. She sat on her porch and she listened to the plight of her neighbors. She opened her home my entire life to folks who needed shelter, rent-free. And I remember asking her, why? And she said to me, baby, because that's what we do. I'm honored to be her legacy and to continue in that tradition. Thank you.
Please welcome Giovanna Torres Nieves.
Exactly 1 month ago, I flew into Miami International Airport. I was coming back to the US after spending the holidays in Colombia with my in-laws. As we joined hundreds of travelers making their way through immigration, we stepped into the line marked US citizens. A woman in uniform, in a very intimidating tone, asked, "Are you a US citizen?" I kept walking. Then I noticed that she was looking directly at us, my husband and I. "Do you have a US passport or a green card?" she said. My husband became a US citizen in 2012. And I was born a US citizen in Puerto Rico. I froze for a moment. We got through the line fairly quickly and made it back to Charlotte with no issue. But I kept replaying that moment in my head, feeling a mix of anger and powerlessness. A familiar feeling. I've lived with these assumptions, these quiet acts of racial profiling since I first moved to the US for college. In 2009, my family made a huge financial sacrifice for me to go to the University of Connecticut. I was 18 years old when an academic advisor suggested I return to Puerto Rico because I didn't have the potential to succeed there. Over the years, there were many tears and many moments of doubt, but I graduated and I built a community there. Unfortunately, I never adjusted to the Connecticut winters, being from Puerto Rico, so I moved to Charlotte. And I remember my mom telling me how she had read that Charlotte had one of the fastest growing Latino demographics in the nation. And when you move far away from home, you look for something that feels familiar, whether it be culture, language, shared experiences. Those things help you belong at the end of the day. But I didn't feel that sense of belonging in Charlotte right away. Professionally, I felt lost, and culturally, I felt invisible. So I started writing about Latin American cinema. I've always loved movies, and the few Latin American films I could find online provided like a sense of comfort. And I thought, if a movie could help me feel at home, could it do the same for others? So I called that blog Cine Casual. That blog grew into a film series, and most recently into the Charlotte Latino Film Festival. But more importantly, it became a community. Over time, I realized that this wasn't just about film. It was about creating space, about being seen, and about just amplifying or sharing our stories and our cultures. I was actually once told by an attendee that the first time she truly felt welcome in Charlotte was at our film festival. And we've been doing the work ever since. In 2023, we received the Nye Foundation grant to start developing our newest initiative, Cine en los Barrios, free, family-friendly neighborhood outdoor movie screenings in predominantly Latino and immigrant neighborhoods, with the goal of breaking down transportation and financial barriers to access. We soft launched in 2024 with our first full year summer series to take place last year. But as you may recall, Border Patrol came to Charlotte back in November, and they terrorized our city for a week. It felt like the longest week ever. My mom asked me not to leave the house, and when I had to, I carried my US passport with me. It was horrifying, but in reality, ICE activity had already been impacting our families for months. Cine en los Barrios was scheduled to start in May, and after so much planning and several ICE incidents already reported, I considered canceling it. I reached out to organizers and advocates who do the work on the ground with our communities and asked what I should do. I was scared and I didn't want to put people at risk, but they didn't hesitate. People are hiding, they told me. They've been hiding for weeks, and they need this more than ever. So we moved forward, but differently. Unlike with the film festival, this time we didn't promote publicly across the county. We worked with trusted community partners and leaders. It was quiet and truly a grassroots effort. We ended up hosting screenings at schools, apartment complexes, and trailer parks. We brought films, yes, but we also brought resources, like Know Your Rights cards, information about upcoming Power of Attorney workshops, and simply connections to support networks. There was hesitation from the community at first, yes, but people came together. Our volunteers were not just greeting folks as they came in, they were spotting for any ICE presence outside. Instead of candy, we had tamales and champurrado. The movies were in the language that they try to make us feel the shame of. And there weren't any fancy chairs. Families brought stools from their kitchen tables. Each night felt less like an event and more like a family gathering. And for me personally, screening films took a whole new meaning. In moments like that, I'm able to confirm what I've known all along, that the arts are not a luxury. And for immigrant communities in particular, the arts provide that sense of belonging and connection that's so needed. Our final screening took place in October. Fall had arrived and the nights were getting colder. The following week, as we're packing our equipment, I received a text from Gina, the property manager at the last apartment complex we visited. I got some really great feedback from a couple of families about the movie night. The message read, "No llores," okay? Don't cry. They're struggling. 3 members of their families had been picked up by ICE. Spending that time at the movie helped them forget their sadness for a bit. They hadn't spent a good moment together in weeks since the incident. They asked if there would be a movie next year. Since then, 10 families are no longer there. Some were taken away, others self-deported, some simply couldn't afford to pay their rent. And I promise Gina will be back this year. So yes, there are moments when I want to move back to Puerto Rico, moments when I want to turn away the next time an officer profiles me at the airport. But there's a lot of work to be done, and we're not backing down. We're currently planning the upcoming edition of the Charlotte Latino Film Festival taking place this April, with a focus on amplifying our stories and highlighting local Latino creatives. And we've started conversations with an after-school program to offer a film camp this summer, one that gives youth the tools to celebrate their identity, learn new skills, and strengthen their connections to their communities. To quote the tagline of one of my favorite Latin American series of this past year, El Eternauta, nadie se salva solo. No one survives alone. Seguimos aquí, and we're committed to continuing this work, and I hope you'll join me on the journey ahead. Thank you.